The Grand St. Philip's Church in Charleston was draped in white and gold, its towering columns and stained glass windows casting colorful reflections across the polished wooden pews. The scent of fresh gardenias and jasmine, southern wedding staples, filled the air. It was the perfect day for a wedding. James Caldwell stood at the altar, adjusting his cufflinks. In his custom-tailored navy blue suit, he looked every bit the successful Charleston businessman. The type of man who built fortunes, made headlines, and was about to marry the most captivating woman in town. His fiancée, Victoria Langley, was beloved by Charleston's high society. Elegant, refined, and effortlessly charming, she had won over everyone, except for Ethan Caldwell, James's 8-year-old son. Standing near the front, clutching the wedding ring pillow, Ethan felt his hands tremble. His suit was neatly pressed, his sandy blonde hair combed to the side just as his father liked. But inside his stomach churned, because he knew the truth. His father wasn't marrying a kind, loving woman. Victoria Langley was a liar, a manipulator, and, if Ethan was right, a dangerous woman who had no intention of letting James live past their honeymoon. He had tried to tell his father, but James wouldn't listen. "Ethan, son, I know this is a big change for us, but Victoria loves me, and she wants to be part of our family." Ethan had wanted to scream, "No, Dad! She's lying!" Instead, he had swallowed his words, watching helplessly as the wedding moved forward. Now standing at the altar, he had one last chance. The church doors swung open, and Victoria stepped inside. Dressed in a fitted lace gown with a pearl-studded veil, she looked breathtaking, at least to everyone else. Charleston's elite watched in admiration as she walked down the aisle, her every movement poised and graceful. But Ethan saw something different. He saw the way she glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, her polished smile faltering for just a second. A warning, a silent command. "Keep quiet, boy, or else." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He turned his gaze toward Ms. Hattie Simmons, their longtime housekeeper standing in the back. The older woman had worked for the Caldwells since before Ethan was born, and she had always trusted her instincts about people. Today, her usual warm expression was missing. Instead, her arms were crossed, her lips pressed into a firm line. She knew. Ethan inhaled sharply. His father didn't see it, but Ms. Hattie did. That meant Ethan wasn't crazy. Victoria reached the altar, slipping her manicured hand into James. The priest cleared his throat, his deep southern drawl filling the church. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Ethan's grip on the ring pillow tightened. His heart pounded. The priest continued, the traditional words echoing against the high ceilings. "If anyone here has reason to believe that these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace." The church fell silent. James smiled at Victoria. Victoria's grip on his hand tightened ever so slightly. Ethan took a shaky breath. This was it. If he stayed silent, his father might not live long enough to regret it. So with all the courage he could gather, he took a step forward and shouted, "Dad, you can't marry her!" A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Victoria's smile vanished. James stiffened, his head snapping toward his son. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Ethan swallowed, his small hands trembling. His father had never looked at him like this before, half confused, half embarrassed. Victoria let out a soft, rehearsed laugh, the kind meant to diffuse an awkward moment in polite company. "Oh, sweetheart," she said smoothly, her voice sweet as molasses. "It's okay. Weddings can be overwhelming, can't they?" She turned to James, squeezing his hand just a little too tightly. "Maybe he's just nervous." Ethan shook his head fiercely. "No, Dad! You don't know who she really is!" Whispers spread through the pews like wildfire. James's face darkened. He crouched down, lowering himself to Ethan's level. His voice was calm but firm. "Ethan, this isn't the time for games. What are you talking about?" Ethan's heart pounded. This was his moment. He clenched his fists and took a deep breath. "She's lying to you, Dad. She doesn't love you. She's planning to hurt you." Silence. Victoria's breathing hitched. For the first time, real fear flashed across her perfect features. The truth was out. The silence in St. Philip's Church was deafening. The whispers had died down, replaced by the stunned expressions of Charleston's elite. their eyes darting between Ethan, James, and Victoria. James stood frozen, his hands still resting on his son's small shoulders. His brow furrowed, lips slightly parted, as if trying to process what Ethan had just said. Victoria, on the other hand, recovered alarmingly fast. She let out a breathy, embarrassed laugh, shaking her head with the kind of poise that only someone used to deception could master. "Oh, bless his little heart," she murmured, her voice filled with feigned affection. "James, he's just nervous. This has been a big adjustment for him, hasn't it?" She knelt down gracefully, her white lace gown pooling around her feet as she reached for Ethan's hand. Her manicured fingers were soft but cold against his skin. "Sweetheart," she cooed, lowering her voice so only he could hear, "don't ruin this for your father." Ethan jerked his hand away. "I'm not lying," he cried, his voice sharp with frustration. He turned back to James, his eyes pleading. "Dad, I heard her talking to someone. A man named Travis Mercer. They're planning something bad." James's jaw tightened. He stood up, straightening his suit jacket as if trying to regain control of the moment. His gaze hardened. "Ethan," he said, his voice low but firm. "That's enough." Ethan's stomach dropped. His father didn't believe him. James turned to Victoria, his expression softening. "I'm so sorry about this. I don't know what's gotten into him." Ethan felt a wave of panic rise in his chest. "No! Dad, please!" He grabbed James's arm, desperation leaking into his voice. "Just check her phone. I know she's been texting him. She deleted messages, but I saw them." Victoria sucked in a sharp breath, and for the first time, something like real fear flickered in her eyes. Ethan caught it. So did someone else. Ms. Hattie Simmons, standing near the back, had been watching the entire exchange with hawk-like intensity. She stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "James," she said, her tone even but urgent. "Maybe you should listen to the boy." Victoria's head snapped toward her, her smile faltering. "Oh, Hattie," she said, her voice saccharine but strained. "I don't think this is—" "I do," Hattie cut in sharply. "I've been in this house since before Ethan was born, and I've seen women like you before." The murmur of the guests grew louder. James hesitated. Ethan seized the moment. "Dad, just check her phone. If I'm wrong, I'll leave it alone. But if I'm right—" He swallowed hard. "You need to know the truth." Victoria's posture stiffened. Her fingers curled tightly around the bouquet in her hands, the delicate white roses crushing beneath her grip. "James," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "I don't have my phone on me right now. It's in the bridal suite. But you're seriously going to let an 8-year-old ruin our wedding?" James exhaled sharply, torn between his fiancée's frustration and his son's desperate plea. Then Detective Ray Carter, Noah's father, stood up from one of the pews. Dressed in his best suit for the occasion, he hadn't expected to be pulled into a case at a wedding. But he knew the Caldwell family well, and he knew that look in Ethan's eyes. It wasn't a tantrum. It was fear. "James," Ray said, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "if the boy says there's something on her phone, then let's go get it." For the first time, Victoria visibly tensed, and Ethan saw it. His breath caught. She was nervous, because she knew what they would find. "I don't see why that's necessary," Victoria said quickly, her voice losing its warmth. "This is absurd. He's just—" James finally raised a hand. "Enough!" Victoria stilled. His voice was calm, but final. "If there's nothing to hide," he said, his sharp blue eyes locking onto hers, "then there's no harm in proving him wrong." For the first time since stepping into the church, Victoria had no words. The air in St. Philip's was thick with tension. The wedding, the guests, the grand illusion of the perfect couple, all of it teetered on the edge of collapse. Victoria's nails dug into the ruined petals of her bouquet. And then slowly, too slowly, she forced a smile. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Let's go." But Ethan knew. She was buying time. She was trapped, and she knew it. And for the first time, Ethan felt hope. Because now it wasn't just him anymore. Someone was finally listening. The tension in St. Philip's Church lingered even after Victoria's forced smile and agreement to check her phone. But Ethan knew better. She was stalling. James turned to Detective Ray Carter, his longtime friend, and nodded. "Let's go," he said. Victoria's fingers clenched around her bouquet, her knuckles turning white. "James," she said sweetly, though there was a new edge to her voice, "let's not turn our wedding day into a spectacle." James, still shaken, inhaled sharply. "If Ethan's wrong, then this will all be over in 5 minutes." Victoria hesitated, a flicker of calculation in her eyes, before letting out a soft, carefully controlled sigh. "Fine," she said. "Let's get this over with." As they made their way down the grand aisle toward the bridal suite, Ethan could feel the curious gazes of the wedding guests drilling into his back. They were watching, judging, whispering. But Ethan didn't care. This was his father's life at stake. 6 weeks earlier, the first warning signs. It all started the day Victoria moved in. Until then, Ethan and his father had always lived in their historic Charleston home, a sprawling estate with wraparound porches and towering oak trees draped in Spanish moss. It was the kind of place that felt warm, safe, like a real home. Then Victoria arrived. Her presence changed everything. The first week was filled with forced smiles, over-the-top affection, and empty promises about how exciting their new family would be. "You and I are going to be best friends, Ethan," she had said that first night, kneeling to his level, her perfume sickly sweet. "You'll see." But something about her didn't feel right. For one, she never seemed to look at him the same way when James wasn't around. At dinner, she would gently place a hand on his father's arm, laughing at his jokes, playing the role of the perfect Southern woman. But when James left the room, her demeanor would shift, just slightly but enough. Her smiles faded faster, her voice lost its warmth. And the first time Ethan saw it happen, he felt a chill creep up his spine. A quiet but chilling warning. One evening, about a week after Victoria moved in, Ethan accidentally spilled a glass of orange juice on the kitchen counter. It wasn't a big deal, or at least it shouldn't have been. James had already left for a business dinner, and Ms. Hattie was out running errands. It was just Ethan and Victoria. Ethan quickly grabbed a napkin, mumbling an apology as he started wiping the spill. Then Victoria's hand clamped down on his wrist. Hard. For a moment he froze, startled by the sudden pressure of her grip. Then she leaned in, so close that he could smell the wine on her breath. Her expression was eerily blank, her voice low and calm. "You need to learn to be more careful," she murmured. Ethan tried to pull away, but her grip tightened for just a second longer before she finally let go. The napkin slipped from his hand. For the first time, Ethan felt trapped. An unsettling conversation. That night, after Ms. Hattie returned, Ethan went to her room. She was folding laundry, her radio softly playing an old gospel song. "Ms. Hattie," he said hesitantly, hovering in the doorway. She glanced up. "What is it, baby?" Ethan hesitated. "Do you like Victoria?" Ms. Hattie's hand stilled for just a second before she continued folding. "Oh, why you asking me that?" "I don't know," Ethan muttered, kicking the rug. "She just doesn't feel like a nice person." Ms. Hattie sighed, setting the folded towel aside. She motioned for Ethan to come sit next to her. "Now listen here, sugar," she said gently. "Your daddy, he's a good man, but sometimes good men don't always see things the way they should." Ethan swallowed hard. "So, you think she's bad too?" Ms. Hattie pursed her lips. "I think she's got secrets," she admitted, "and I think you got a good head on your shoulders for not trusting people too quick." Ethan looked down at his hands, his stomach twisting. "But," she added, tilting his chin up to meet her eyes, "if you feel like something ain't right, you trust that feeling. You hear me?" Ethan nodded slowly. He just wished his father would listen too. Back to the present, at the bridal suite. The doorknob turned with a soft click as Victoria led them inside. The bridal suite at St. Philip's was as elegant as expected. Cream-colored furniture, a vintage vanity, and a full-length mirror reflecting the tension in the room. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as Victoria walked over to a side table and picked up her rose gold phone. "See?" she said smoothly, turning back to James. "Now can we put this ridiculous little stunt behind us and—" "I'll check it," James interrupted, reaching for the phone. Victoria stopped mid-sentence. For a split second, Ethan saw it, the flicker of pure panic in her eyes before she quickly masked it. She hesitated. Then slowly, she handed the phone over. James took it, his expression unreadable as he started scrolling. Ethan held his breath. And then, James stopped cold, his face drained of color. Victoria inhaled sharply. Ethan knew. He'd found something. James stood frozen, his eyes locked on the phone screen. His fingers hovered over the messages, the light from the screen illuminating the growing tension in his face. Ethan watched his father's expression shift, from confusion to disbelief, then to something colder. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Victoria, standing just a few feet away, must have noticed too. She took a slow step forward, her voice carefully measured. James, honey, whatever you're seeing, I can explain. James's grip on the phone tightened. His eyes flicked up to hers, the warmth he once held for her completely gone. Explain? His voice was dangerously low. Explain what exactly, Victoria? Ethan inched closer, his heart pounding. Did his father finally see it? James turned the phone slightly, revealing a text thread with the name Travis Mercer at the top. The messages were recent. Too recent. Victoria. We need to move faster. The wedding will seal the deal, but I don't want to wait any longer. Travis. I'll have everything set up after the reception. Once you get him alone, I'll take care of the rest. Victoria. Make sure it looks like an accident. I don't want any loose ends. Ethan felt his stomach drop. There it was. The proof. James slowly looked up, his breathing heavy. What the hell is this? Victoria didn't blink. Her eyes flickered to Ethan for just a second before she let out a breathy, almost amused chuckle. Oh, James, she said, shaking her head. This isn't what it looks like. Ethan felt a surge of frustration. She was still lying. Even now. James exhaled sharply, running a hand over his jaw. Then tell me, he challenged, his voice dangerously calm. Tell me what it is, Victoria. For the first time, a crack appeared in her carefully crafted mask. Her shoulders tensed, her fingers twitched at her sides. Ethan could see the calculation behind her eyes. And then suddenly she switched tactics. Her lips trembled, and within seconds her eyes welled with tears. James, I swear, I can explain everything. Travis, he's just an old friend. I was helping him through a tough time, and… Helping him? James cut in sharply, shoving the phone toward her. Helping him plan my death? The words hit like a gunshot in the silent bridal suite. Victoria flinched. For a split second, her entire facade shattered. Ethan saw it. His father saw it. She knew she was cornered. But before anyone could react, Victoria spun on her heel and bolted. Hey! James barked, but she was already halfway to the door. Ethan lunged forward, instinctively reaching out. But Victoria was fast. Too fast. The door slammed open and she raced into the hall, her white lace dress flowing behind her, like a ghost in flight. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She's running! He shouted. James was already moving. Ray! He bellowed, turning toward Detective Carter, who had remained at the door. Stop her! The detective took off down the hallway, his dress shoes pounding against the wooden floorboards. Ethan raced after them, his heart hammering. This wasn't over yet. Not even close. Victoria's white lace gown billowed behind her as she sprinted down the long corridor of St. Philip's Church, her heels clicking frantically against the wooden floors. The murmur of wedding guests still lingering in the sanctuary grew louder as her hurried escape sent a wave of confusion rippling through the building. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Ethan burst through the bridal suite doorway, his pulse racing as he saw his father and Detective Carter already in pursuit. She's heading for the exit, Ethan shouted. James was close behind her, his broad frame moving faster than Ethan had ever seen before. Victoria, he bellowed, don't you dare run! But Victoria didn't listen. She was already halfway down the grand staircase, her hands clutching the banister for balance as she flew down the steps, her veil slipping from her carefully pinned hair. Detective Carter's voice boomed through the church as he followed. Victoria Langley, stop right now! But Victoria had no intention of stopping. She had a plan. Her mind raced. Think, think, think. She knew Charleston like the back of her hand. If she could just get outside, get to her car, she still had a chance. She reached the main foyer, her breath coming in short gasps. A few startled wedding guests still loitered near the grand entrance, their faces twisted in confusion. One of them, a well-dressed older woman, stepped forward. "Victoria, dear, what's going on? Are you all re—" Victoria shoved past her without a word, nearly knocking the woman off balance as she barreled toward the exit. Just a few more feet, just a few more steps, and she would be free. She reached for the massive wooden church doors, gripping the ornate brass handle. And then a hand clamped down on her wrist. "Not so fast." Victoria whipped around, coming face to face with James. For a split second, her carefully constructed world came crashing down. James's expression was unrecognizable. No longer the kind, devoted man who had once loved her, but someone filled with raw betrayal. "Let me go, James," she hissed through clenched teeth, her calm facade now completely shattered. "Why? So you can run to Travis?" His grip tightened. "So you can finish whatever twisted plan you two started?" Victoria's eyes flashed with desperation. "You don't understand." But before she could say another word, Detective Carter caught up, his badge flashing in the dim light. "Victoria Langley, your co—" Victoria's chest rose and fell rapidly, her mind scrambling for a way out. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She needed to think. Fast. She wasn't going down without a fight. Victoria's mind raced as Detective Carter reached for her arm. No, no, no. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She had planned everything. The charming Southern wedding, the airtight alibi, the accidental tragedy that would leave her a wealthy widow. But Ethan had ruined it all. Victoria's breath came in short, ragged gasps as she yanked her arm back, her nails digging into James's wrist. "Let me go!" she shrieked, her voice shrill enough to echo off the church's stone walls. James didn't budge. His grip remained iron tight, his expression unreadable. Victoria panicked. She did the only thing she could think of. She twisted her body and brought the sharp heel of her wedding shoe down onto James's foot. James let out a sharp grunt, his hold loosening just enough. Victoria ripped free. She bolted for the door, throwing herself against the heavy wooden panels. They burst open, sunlight blinding her as she stumbled onto the grand steps of St. Philip's Church. Freedom. Her car. She just needed to get to her car. She flew down the steps, her dress tangling around her legs, nearly sending her sprawling. The Charleston air was thick with heat, the sounds of the city ringing in her ears. She spotted her white Mercedes parked at the curb. Almost there. Her fingers fumbled for the keys in the folds of her dress, and then a blur of blue and khaki blocked her path. Victoria skidded to a halt. A uniformed officer stood in front of her, arms crossed. Behind him, two more officers approached, hands resting casually on their holstered weapons. She whipped around, searching for another way out. But James and Detective Carter were already right behind her. She was trapped. Her chest heaved as she turned back to James, desperation flashing in her eyes. "James," she gasped, forcing tears into her voice, her entire body trembling. "Please, this is all a mistake. You have to believe me." James' jaw clenched. "You tried to have me killed, Victoria." His voice was flat, cold. The pain in his eyes was undeniable, but so was the rage simmering beneath it. The officers closed in. Victoria's eyes darted wildly between them. She had to think, fast. Then she collapsed to her knees. "James, please," she sobbed, her hands clutching at his. "I love you. I was being blackmailed. Travis, he forced me to—" "Liar!" The word cut through the air like a knife. Victoria's head snapped up. Ethan stood at the top of the church steps, his small frame silhouetted against the bright sunlight. His voice didn't waver. "I heard you," he said, his blue eyes sharp and unblinking. "I saw the messages. You were never going to stop." Victoria's face twisted, her perfect Southern Belle facade cracking for good. Her gaze hardened, and for just a moment, she looked at Ethan like she wanted to strangle him. But it was too late. One of the officers grabbed her wrist, snapping on handcuffs with a decisive click. "Victoria Langley," the officer said, his voice steady. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." Victoria let out a strangled cry as they hauled her to her feet. James exhaled, running a hand through his hair, his entire body tense with disbelief. Ethan just stood there, unmoving, watching as they took her away. And as Victoria was forced into the back of a police cruiser, her eyes still burning with fury and humiliation, Ethan finally felt it. Relief. She was gone. But something still nagged at him. This wasn't over yet, because Travis Mercer was still out there, and he wasn't finished. The sun was beginning to set over Charleston, casting long shadows through the stained glass windows of St. Philip's Church. The once grand wedding hall was now eerily quiet. Guests had dispersed, murmuring about the shocking turn of events. Ethan stood just inside the church doorway, watching as Victoria's police cruiser disappeared down the street. A part of him expected her to come back, to somehow escape, to find a way to keep lying. But she was gone. For now. Detective Carter patted James on the shoulder, his voice gravelly but steady. "I'll make sure she stays locked up, but James, we need to talk." James still hadn't moved. His face was pale, his usually sharp blue eyes clouded with a mix of anger, embarrassment, and something else Ethan had never seen in his father before. Doubt. "Yeah," James said hoarsely. "Yeah, okay." Detective Carter gestured toward the doors. "Let's go down to the station. I need you to make a formal statement." Ethan tensed. His father was leaving. After everything that had just happened, after Victoria had been caught trying to kill him, James was just walking away. Ethan grabbed his father's sleeve, forcing him to look down. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice sharp, "we can't just leave." James sighed, his exhaustion heavy in the air. "Ethan, we've done." Ethan shook his head. "Number she left things behind. We need to check the bridal suite." For the first time, Miss Hattie, who had remained silent in the back, stepped forward. "He's right," she said firmly, folding her arms. "That woman wasn't just planning a wedding, James. She was planning a whole damn crime." James rubbed his temples, clearly struggling to process the weight of it all. Detective Carter exhaled. "I'd agree with them," he said. "Victoria's slick, but no one pulls off something like this without a paper trail." James hesitated, then finally nodded. "All right," he said, his voice quiet. "Let's check." Ethan didn't wait for permission. He turned and sprinted back toward the bridal suite. Inside the suite, a room of lies. The moment Ethan pushed open the door, he knew something was off. The once pristine bridal suite was a wreck. The bed was rumpled, drawers were half open, and a makeup bag lay unzipped on the vanity. Ethan's heart pounded. Victoria must have been planning to grab something before she ran. Ms. Hattie clicked her tongue. "She left in a hurry." Ethan rushed to the vanity, pulling open the drawer. His fingers froze when he saw what was inside. A burner phone. Ms. Hattie's eyes narrowed. "Well now, what do we have here?" Ethan reached for it. "This could have..." But before he could touch it, the screen lit up. A message. An incoming call. And the name flashing on the screen sent a cold chill through Ethan's veins. Travis Mercer. Ethan stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the burner phone. The name Travis Mercer blinked at him, the dull glow of the call notification casting an eerie light over the dimly lit bridal suite. The phone buzzed again. Ethan's pulse raced. His father and Detective Carter were right outside. But something told him that if he let this call go to voicemail, Travis would disappear for good. Without thinking, he swiped to answer. "Victoria!" A deep, gravelly voice came through immediately, sharp and impatient. "What the hell happened? Why aren't you answering your damn texts?" Ethan swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. He had no plan. He just knew he had to keep Travis talking. Ethan hesitated, then quickly cupped his hand over the microphone to muffle his voice. He glanced at Miss Hattie, who had gone rigid, her sharp eyes widening in alarm. She mouthed, "Keep him talking." Ethan took a shaky breath and tried to lower his voice. I'm working on it," he muttered, hoping Travis wouldn't catch on. Silence, then a low chuckle. "You sound nervous," Travis said slowly, suspicion creeping into his voice. "That's not like you." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. Think. He lowered his voice even more, trying to match Victoria's smooth southern drawl the way he had heard her speak so many times before. "Things didn't go as planned," Ethan whispered, keeping his answers short. Travis cursed under his breath. "Yeah, I figured that when I saw half of Charleston PD outside the damn church." Ethan's stomach twisted. He's watching us? His hands started shaking. Miss Hattie, catching on, snatched a notepad from the vanity and scribbled something down. Where is he? Ethan took a deep breath. Where are you? He asked, forcing his voice to stay calm. Travis paused. Why? Ethan had no idea what to say. His palms were sweating. He was about to say something, anything, when suddenly Detective Carter snatched the phone from his hand. Mercer. Carter's voice was cold, firm, authoritative. This is Detective Ray Carter with Charleston PD. You want to talk? You talk to me. Silence. Then a click. Travis had hung up. Ethan's heart dropped. Detective Carter cursed, immediately dialing back, but the call went straight to voicemail. Damn it, he muttered, then turned to James. We need to move now. James, who had remained silent, nodded stiffly. Where do you think he is? Carter's jaw tightened. Close. If he saw the cops at the church, he's either watching from a distance or already on the move. Miss Hattie, still gripping the notepad, shook her head. That man ain't gonna let Victoria go down alone, she murmured. He's gonna come back and try to clean up the mess. James exhaled, running a shaking hand through his hair. So what do we do now? Detective Carter's eyes darkened. We find Travis before he finds us. The bridal suite was silent, but the tension hung thick in the air. The only sound was the distant murmur of police radios outside the church, where Victoria had been taken away just minutes earlier. Ethan sat on the edge of the vanity stool, his hands still clammy from the phone call with Travis Mercer. James stood near the doorway, arms crossed tightly over his chest, his expression unreadable. His father was a man who prided himself on being in control, but now Ethan could see it. For the first time, James Caldwell looked completely lost. Detective Carter paced by the window, checking his phone every few seconds, no doubt waiting for his O. And Ms. Hattie, the one person who had believed Ethan from the start, was rifling through Victoria's abandoned belongings with an efficiency that sent a chill down his spine. Woman was always hiding something, she muttered, shoving aside a silk robe draped over a chair. Ain't no way she left all that scheming up to just one man. Ethan nodded in agreement, then turned back to his father. Dad, he said carefully, his voice still hoarse from shouting in the church earlier. You believe me now, don't you? James exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Ethan, He hesitated, then looked down at his son with tired eyes. I don't know how I let it get this far. Ethan felt his stomach twist. For weeks he had begged his father to listen to him, to see what was right in front of him. Now James looked like a man who had just woken up from a nightmare, only to realize he'd been sleepwalking straight toward his own funeral. I almost married her, James muttered, almost to himself. Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't want to say, I told you so. He just wanted to know that his dad was back on his side. Before he could say anything, Miss Hattie let out a sharp noise. Well, look at what we got here. Everyone turned. She stood near the vanity, holding a small velvet jewelry box. Ethan blinked. That's just the... Miss Hattie flipped it open. But instead of wedding rings, a flash drive sat nestled in the cushion. Detective Carter snatched it up immediately, turning it over in his fingers. Looks like we just found our next lead. Ethan leaned forward, his pulse quickening. What's on it? Carter met his gaze, his expression grim. There's only one way to find out. Detective Carter turned the small flash drive over in his fingers, his face unreadable. The room was silent, the tension growing with every passing second. James exhaled and ran a hand through his hair, still struggling to process the events of the past hour. Let's see what's on it, he finally said, his voice low and tight. Miss Hattie shot Ethan a glance, then gestured to the laptop sitting on the vanity, a sleek silver MacBook that Victoria had left behind in her rush to escape. I doubt that woman set up wedding playlists on this thing, she muttered. Carter moved quickly, plugging the flash drive in. Ethan held his breath as the screen lit up. One single folder appeared, labeled Insurance Files. James let out a sharp exhale, his fist clenching. Damn it! Carter clicked into the folder. Inside were scanned documents, emails, and bank transfers, all detailing the exact scheme Victoria had been planning. Victoria Langley, listed as James' sole beneficiary. Payout amount, $10 million upon his death. Policy approval date, 2 months ago. And beneath that, a series of emails between Victoria and Travis. Victoria: I don't want to wait anymore. We do this after the wedding. Travis: You sure you can handle it? Victoria: It's just one weekend at the beach house, one boating accident, and we're set for life. Ethan felt his stomach churn. James's face paled. She was going to take me to the beach house. His voice cracked slightly. He stopped, rubbing his temples. I almost walked into it. No one spoke. Because he was right. If Ethan hadn't spoken up, Victoria's plan would have worked perfectly. James would have died, and she would have gotten everything. Carter clenched his jaw. She wasn't just scamming you. She was going to kill you, James. James let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. And I was about to say, I do. The reality of it hit him like a freight train. Ethan looked up at his father, his small voice cutting through the thick silence. You believe me now, right? James turned to his son, and for the first time since all of this started, he didn't look at Ethan with doubt or dismissal. He just nodded. I do, son. Ethan's chest tightened, but this time not with frustration, with relief. Carter closed the laptop, exhaling hard. This is enough evidence to put her away for years. Then, his phone buzzed. He checked the screen. A new alert from his officers. Travis Mercer had been spotted just outside Charleston, and he wasn't running. He was coming back. The air in St. Philip's Church felt heavier, like the storm hadn't quite passed yet. Detective Carter read the text again, his expression darkening. Travis Mercer spotted. Possible return to Charleston. Proceed with caution. James let out a slow, measured breath. He's coming back. Miss Hattie's hand stilled over Victoria's scattered belongings, her eyes sharp. I told y'all, she murmured. That man ain't gonna let this go easy. Ethan clenched his fists. Of course, Travis wasn't done. Victoria might have been the face of the operation, but Travis, he was the one who got his hands dirty. Do you think he knows Victoria's been arrested? Ethan asked, glancing at Carter. Carter exhaled through his nose, slipping his phone back into his pocket. He knows, he said simply. James stiffened at those words. You think he's coming for us? Carter's silence was answer enough. Ethan's heart pounded. They had proof. They had Victoria. They had the insurance files, the emails, everything. But Victoria had always had Travis. And now? She wasn't around to stop him from doing what he did best. We need to go, Carter said suddenly, his voice sharper now, urgent. James, you and Ethan are coming with me. I want you someplace safe until my team finds Mercer. James hesitated, glancing at his son. Ethan, go grab your things, he said quickly. We're leaving. Ethan nodded and took off down the hallway, his small legs carrying him as fast as they could. Ethan's bedroom, the unfinished goodbye. The Caldwell estate was only 15 minutes from the church, but it felt a world away now. Ethan hurried into his bedroom, grabbing his backpack from the bed and shoving in a few essentials, a change of clothes, his tablet, the notebook where he had written every suspicious thing about Victoria. He paused, his gaze flicking to his desk. There, sitting in the center, was the snow globe his mother had given him before she died. A miniature Charleston harbor, tiny boats floating inside when shaken. For a moment, Ethan just stared at it. Before Victoria, before his father had started dating again, things had been simpler. Lonelier, maybe, but safe. Now, everything was upside down. He grabbed the snow globe and stuffed it in his bag. Just as he zipped it up, he heard a noise downstairs. A door. Opening. Ethan froze. His father and Carter weren't supposed to be back yet. Someone was in the house, and they weren't supposed to be there. Ethan didn't move. His breath hitched in his throat as he heard the faint but unmistakable creak of the front door closing. Someone was inside. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he slowly backed toward the corner of his room. He barely dared to breathe, straining to listen for any other sounds. And then, footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Not his father, not Detective Carter. A cold chill crawled up Ethan's spine. Travis Mercer was here. He glanced toward his bedroom door. It was open, a mistake. If he tried to shut it now, the noise would give him away. Ethan's mind raced. He had seconds to decide: run, hide, or fight. Outside his room, the footsteps grew louder, moving up the stairs. Ethan darted toward his bed, dropping to the floor and crawling underneath. He pressed his body as far back as he could, tucking his backpack against his chest. His small fingers gripped the fabric of the carpet as the steps reached the landing. Then a voice, low, steady, deadly. "Ethan?" Ethan's body went rigid. Travis knew he was here. A long silence stretched through the house. Then came the sound of a drawer opening downstairs. Travis was looking for something. A gun? A knife? Ethan didn't know, but his stomach twisted into knots. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. Then he heard it, a soft beep, his father's security system arming itself. Ethan's heart leapt. James and Detective Carter were back, but so was Travis. Downstairs, a standoff. James pushed open the front door, his grip tightening on his keys. Something felt off. Carter, right behind him, froze mid-step. His sharp gaze flicked toward the kitchen counter. One of the drawers was open. James's pulse spiked. He set his keys down slowly, as if any sudden movement might set something off. "Ethan," he called. "You here, buddy?" Silence. Then, a creak from the staircase. James turned just in time to see a figure stepping into view. Travis Mercer. He stood at the top of the stairs, his hands casually tucked into his pockets, but his eyes, cold, calculating, locked onto James. Carter's hand went straight to his holster. "Don't move," Travis smirked. "Evening, gentlemen." James's blood boiled. "Where's my son?" Travis tilted his head. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" And before James could move, before Carter could react, a voice echoed from upstairs. "Dad!" Ethan's voice rang through the house, sharp and desperate. "Dad!" James's heart slammed against his ribs as his head snapped toward the staircase. The fear in Ethan's voice was enough to ignite something primal inside him. He took a step forward, but Travis Mercer lifted a hand, smirking. "Easy there, James," he said, his tone almost amused. "We don't need this to get messy." Carter was already drawing his gun. "Step away from the stairs, Mercer. Now." Travis didn't budge. Instead, he turned his head slightly, glancing behind him, toward the hallway leading to Ethan's room. James' blood ran cold. Ethan was trapped upstairs. Travis knew it. The smirk faded from his face, replaced by something hard, sharp, dangerous. James took another step forward, fists clenched at his sides. "If you touch him," James growled, his voice low and deadly, "I swear to God, you won't leave this house alive." Travis chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Big words, Caldwell," he muttered. But with lightning-fast speed, Travis spun toward the hallway and took off running. "Go!" Carter barked, launching himself up the stairs. James was right behind him. His pulse pounded as he sprinted toward Ethan's room, his mind screaming only one thing: get to his son. But Travis had the lead, and he knew exactly where he was going. Upstairs, Ethan's room. Ethan's breath came in short, panicked gasps as he heard the pounding footsteps getting closer. Travis was coming. His eyes darted around the room, looking for anything, any escape. The window. It was risky, but it was his only choice. Ethan rushed forward, gripping the latch and shoving the window open. The cool Charleston air rushed in, the scent of salt water and rain filling his lungs. But as he hoisted one leg over the ledge, the door burst open. Ethan whipped around, and there was Travis. Breathing hard, his dark eyes locked onto Ethan like a predator eyeing its prey. "Where do you think you're going, kid?" Travis said smoothly, wiping sweat from his brow. "I just want to talk." Ethan's hands tightened on the windowsill. His heart was beating so hard it hurt. "You're lying," Ethan spat. "Just like Victoria." Travis smirked. "Smart kid." And then he lunged. Ethan flinched back, scrambling to climb onto the roof. But Travis's hand closed around his ankle. Ethan screamed, "Let go!" Travis yanked hard, dragging him back inside. Ethan kicked, thrashed, tried to twist free, but Travis was too strong. And just as Ethan thought this was it, a gunshot rang through the house. The gunshot tore through the house, a sharp, deafening crack that sent a shudder through the walls. For a second, everything went still. Ethan's ears rang, his body frozen in Travis Mercer's iron grip. Then, Travis jerked back with a sharp grunt. Ethan's breath caught as he saw blood bloom across the sleeve of Travis' jacket. Someone had shot him. And then James's voice, hoarse, furious. "Get away from my son!" Ethan whipped his head around to see his father standing in the doorway, gun raised, hands steady. Detective Carter was right behind him, his weapon drawn as well. Travis staggered back, his free hand clutching his bleeding arm, his face twisted in pain. But there was still fire in his eyes. James took a slow step forward, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like he might shatter his own teeth. "I warned you," James said, his voice like thunder before a storm. Travis let out a ragged laugh, grimacing as he flexed his injured arm. "You're a rich man, Caldwell. You're not going to shoot me." James's finger tightened on the trigger. "Try me." For the first time, Travis hesitated. His gaze flicked to Detective Carter, then back to Ethan, still panting and struggling against his grip. And then, he moved. Travis shoved Ethan forward hard. Ethan stumbled, falling to his knees just as Travis spun toward the window. "Stop!" Carter shouted. But Travis didn't stop. He lunged for the open window, throwing himself through it just as another gunshot rang out. Ethan gasped, scrambling to his feet. James rushed forward, grabbing his son and pulling him tight against his chest. "I got you, buddy. I got you." Ethan's heart pounded against his ribs, but his father's strong arms wrapped around him, grounding him. He was safe. James turned sharply to Carter. "Did you?" Carter was already moving. "He's gone." They rushed to the window. Outside, the streets of Charleston were quiet, bathed in golden-orange streetlights. But Travis Mercer? Nowhere to be seen. James cursed under his breath. Carter immediately reached for his radio. "Suspect is injured and fleeing on foot. All units be advised. Travis Mercer is still armed and dangerous." James gritted his teeth, his grip on Ethan unwavering. But Ethan, breathing heavily, heart still racing, knew one thing for sure. Travis wasn't running away. He was waiting for his next move. And this wasn't over yet. The flashing red and blue lights of Charleston PD bathed the Caldwell estate in a cold glow, cutting through the humid night air. Officers moved in and out of the house, securing every entrance, every blind spot. But no one felt at ease. Travis Mercer had escaped. And as long as he was out there, Ethan wasn't safe. James sat on the edge of the living room couch, his head in his hands. Across from him, Detective Carter was on the phone, barking orders. "We need patrol units circling downtown and every damn exit out of the city. I want his name at every bus station, airport, and rental service. Mercer doesn't leave Charleston." James barely heard him. The only thing ringing in his ears was the sound of that gunshot, the image of Travis grabbing Ethan, dragging him back inside the window. It wouldn't leave his head, his hands curled into fists. James had always been a man of control, of careful, strategic decisions. But when he saw his son in that monster's grip, fighting for his life, he had never felt rage like that before. "James!" Carter's voice snapped him back to the arm. A sudden knock on the door made him jump. Ms. Hattie peeked inside. "You ready, baby?" Ethan nodded, slipping the snow globe into his bag. Ms. Hattie studied him for a moment, then sighed. "I know you're scared, but your daddy ain't gonna let nothing happen to you. Neither will I." Ethan managed a small smile. Then, from downstairs, the sound of glass shattering, James's voice sharp and urgent. "Get down!" Ethan barely had time to react before Ms. Hattie grabbed him, pulling him away from the door. Someone was inside the house. Again. The sound of shattering glass sent a pulse of adrenaline through Ethan's body. Ms. Hattie's grip on his arm tightened, her voice low but firm. "We need to move now." From downstairs, James's voice rang out again. "Ethan, stay where you are." Ethan couldn't breathe. Travis Mercer was inside the house. Ms. Hattie didn't wait. She yanked open the closet door, pushing Ethan inside. "Stay put. Don't move till I say so. You hear me?" Ethan nodded frantically, his heart hammering against his ribs. He watched as Ms. Hattie grabbed the metal bat James kept under the bed, gripping it with surprising steadiness. Then, footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate, coming up the stairs. Ethan pressed his back against the wall, biting his lip to keep from making a sound. His fingers clenched around the snow globe in his backpack, holding it like it could somehow protect him. The footsteps grew louder. Ms. Hattie moved to the bedroom door, gripping the bat tightly. Then the doorknob turned. Ethan held his breath. The door swung open, and standing there, Travis Mercer. His face was shadowed in the dim light, his wounded arm still stained with dried blood. His dark eyes swept over the room, scanning, hunting. Ms. Hattie didn't move. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Travis smirked. "Move aside, lady. I just want the kid." Ms. Hattie's grip tightened. Her voice was calm but sharp as a blade. "You step 1 foot closer, and I'll crack your skull open like a walnut." Travis laughed, a low, cold sound. "I like you," he mused. "Shame you don't know who you're dealing with." And then he moved. Fast. Too fast. Ms. Hattie swung the bat, but Travis ducked, his uninjured arm shooting out, grabbing her wrist. She struggled, gritting her teeth, but Travis was stronger. He twisted her arm hard, and the bat clattered to the floor. "Nice try, sweetheart," Travis hissed, shoving her aside. Ethan saw his chance. He burst out of the closet, throwing his entire weight into Travis's injured arm. Travis yelled in pain, stumbling back. Ethan didn't stop. He grabbed the snow globe from his bag and smashed it against Travis's head. Glass shattered. Water spilled. Tiny boats hit the floor. Travis staggered, disoriented. And then James appeared. His father's fist collided with Travis's jaw, sending him crashing into the nightstand. "You don't get to touch my son," Travis groaned, barely conscious. Then the sound of sirens filled the night. Detective Carter and his team stormed into the house, guns drawn. Carter's voice rang out. "Hands where I can see them, Mercer. It's over." Travis didn't fight. He just laughed, spitting blood onto the floor. And with a smug smirk, he muttered, "You think this is over?" But James wasn't listening. He just turned to Ethan, kneeling down, gripping his son's shoulders. "Are you okay?" Ethan nodded, shaking. His eyes flicked to the broken snow globe on the floor. "I broke it," he whispered. James pulled him into a tight embrace. "It's okay. You did good, buddy." Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. For the first time in weeks, he felt safe. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cars reflected off the shattered glass on the Caldwell estate's hardwood floors. Officers moved through the house, securing the scene, taking statements, and dragging Travis Mercer out in handcuffs. Ethan stood frozen in place, watching as the man who had terrorized him smirked, even in defeat. Travis's lip was split, his eye swollen, his arm still bleeding from the gunshot wound James had given him earlier. But despite it all, he looked amused, like he had won. James stood just a few feet away, fists still clenched at his sides. His breathing was slow, controlled. But Ethan knew his father wanted nothing more than to finish what he started. Detective Carter pushed Travis toward the squad car. "You're done, Mercer. Say whatever last words you've got now, because the next time you open your mouth, it'll be in front of a judge." Travis chuckled, shaking his head. "You think this is done?" He turned his bruised face toward James. "You really think locking me up changes anything?" James stiffened. "You were an easy target, Caldwell," Travis sneered. "Rich, desperate, looking for love. She played you like a damn violin." James took a sharp step forward, but Carter immediately lifted a hand to stop him. "Don't. He wants a reaction." Travis grinned, but his gaze flicked past James. To Ethan. The boy felt his stomach tighten. "Why? Victoria's in custody. Mercer's on his way to booking. But their type?" Carter shook his head. "They don't stop until they're forced to." James' gaze darkened. "Then I'll make damn sure he's never a threat to my son again." Ethan stood near the staircase listening, and in that moment he realized something. His father wasn't just angry, he was afraid. The Caldwell estate felt different now, not like a home, not like a safe place. Ethan sat at the bottom of the grand staircase, his knees tucked to his chest. The voices of the police officers outside had faded, but Travis' words still echoed in his mind. Next time, there won't be a warning. He gripped the fabric of his jeans, his chest tight. He wanted to believe that it was over, that Victoria and Travis would never hurt them again. But something deep inside him told him this wasn't finished. His father's voice cut through the silence. Ethan. Ethan looked up. James stood near the entryway, his tie undone, sleeves rolled up, exhaustion written in every line of his face. But his blue eyes, the same ones Ethan had, were softer now. James stepped forward and knelt, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Look at me, son. Ethan met his gaze. James sighed, rubbing his jaw. I know I messed up. His voice was low, rough, like it hurt to admit. I should have believed you from the start. I should have seen what she was doing. Ethan swallowed hard. James hesitated, then shook his head. I let my own feelings blind me, and because of that, I put you in danger. Ethan's throat felt tight. He wanted to tell his dad it was okay, but it wasn't. James inhaled sharply. I won't make that mistake again. Silence stretched between them. Then finally Ethan nodded. James squeezed his shoulder. We're leaving Charleston for a while. Ethan's head snapped up. What? James stood, running a hand over his face. Carter says Mercer still has allies. People who will try to finish what he started. I'm not risking that. Ethan felt his stomach drop. We're just going to run? James exhaled, staring out the window. We're going to be smart. Ethan hated it. He didn't want to leave his home. But he knew. Travis wasn't done. Miss Hattie stepped forward from the hallway, arms crossed. Where exactly you planning on taking this boy? James looked over at her, something unreadable in his gaze. I have a place, he said quietly. Somewhere Mercer won't find us. Ethan wanted to argue, but when he saw the look on his father's face, he knew there was no choice, because nowhere was safe, not until Mercer was gone, for good. The storm clouds rolled in over Charleston as James drove in silence, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. The winding road out of town stretched before them, disappearing into the misty darkness. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, backpack clutched in his lap, watching the raindrops streak across the window. His father's car, a sleek black SUV, cut through the night like a ghost slipping away unseen. They were running. Again. James had barely spoken since they left the house. No music, no small talk, just silence. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Where are we going? James's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror before answering. A cabin, few hours outside the city. No one knows about it. Ethan frowned. Not even Ms. Hattie? James hesitated. Not even her. Ethan's stomach twisted. That wasn't a good sign. If his dad didn't even trust Ms. Hattie with their location, then things were worse than he thought. Outside, the trees blurred together in the rain. The city lights had long faded behind them, replaced by the endless stretch of isolated backroads. We'll be safe there, James continued, his voice low. Ethan wasn't so sure. The cabin, a temporary refuge. By the time they pulled up to the secluded cabin, the storm had worsened. The rain came down in thick sheets, turning the dirt driveway into a muddy mess. The cabin itself was small but sturdy, hidden deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. James killed the engine and exhaled. We won't stay long, just until Carter finds Mercer. Ethan climbed out of the car, his sneakers sinking slightly into the wet ground. He glanced around, uneasy. The forest felt too quiet, too still. James unlocked the door and flipped on the lights. The cabin's interior was minimalist, just the basics. A fireplace, a small kitchen, a couch, and a single hallway leading to 2 bedrooms. Ethan dumped his backpack onto the couch and turned to his dad. And what if Carter doesn't find him? James set his gun on the kitchen counter and met Ethan's gaze. Then I will. Ethan's stomach dropped. His dad wasn't talking about hiding anymore. He was talking about finishing this. Before Ethan could say anything, James's phone buzzed. He grabbed it and read the message. His expression darkened. Unknown number. You really thought I'd let you leave that easy? Ethan's blood ran cold. Dad! James's grip tightened around the phone. And then, the low rumble of an engine sent a wave of ice through Ethan's veins. Someone was out there. James' body tensed as he slid his gun off the counter, his jaw tightening. Ethan, get down! Ethan didn't hesitate. He ducked behind the couch, pressing his back against the worn fabric. His heart pounded so loud it drowned out the rain. James moved to the window, keeping his body low and out of sight. Carefully, he peeked between the wooden blinds. Headlights cut through the trees. A black sedan sat at the edge of the muddy driveway, its engine still running. James cursed under his breath. It's not the cops. Ethan swallowed hard. Then who is it? A shadow moved behind the fogged-up windshield. Then, a second one. More than one person? James exhaled slowly, mind racing. He didn't know if Travis was in that car, but one thing was certain. Whoever they weren't here by accident. The storm raged outside, rain hammering the cabin's roof like a warning. James took a step back, forcing himself to think. Two choices. Try to run, risk getting caught in the open. Stand his ground, risk a firefight with Ethan inside. Neither option was good. Another movement outside. The driver's side door opened. A figure stepped out, half shrouded in the rain. A tall man in a dark coat, hood pulled low over his face. James's grip tightened on the gun. Then, the second door opened. The second man was bigger, slower, more cautious. They weren't amateurs. They were Mercer's men, and they were here for him and Ethan. James gritted his teeth. He was done running. He turned to Ethan, crouching low. His voice was firm, steady. Listen to me, kid. I need you to do exactly what I say. Ethan nodded quickly, his hands clenched around his backpack. Okay. James pointed toward the back hallway. Take the emergency exit. Get to the woods. Stay low. Stay quiet. Ethan's stomach twisted. But no arguing, James cut in. I'll be right behind you. Ethan's chest felt tight. He didn't want to leave his dad alone, but there was no time. James gave his shoulder a quick squeeze. Go. Now. Ethan swallowed hard and nodded. Then he turned and ran. James took a slow breath, adjusting his grip on the gun. Then, the first knock came at the door. Not a polite one, a slow, deliberate thud. They weren't in a hurry. They knew they had them trapped. James set his jaw. If Travis thought he'd win this, he had another thing coming. Thud, thud, thud. The slow, deliberate knocking sent a shiver down James's spine. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to finish the job. James gripped his gun tighter, his body coiled like a spring. His heartbeat thumped like a war drum, but his mind stayed clear. Ethan was running. That was all that mattered. James took a step back from the door, moving toward the corner of the cabin, where the light switch sat. The second knock came, louder this time. Then a voice. Mr. Caldwell. James froze. The voice wasn't Mercer's. It was smooth, controlled, a professional, not some low-level thug. The handle jiggled. James flipped the lights off. The cabin sank into total darkness. Outside, the storm raged, the wind whipping through the trees, rain hammering against the cabin's tin roof. James pressed his back against the wall, gun raised. Then, the door burst open. A man stepped inside. Tall, dressed in black. A silencer attached to his pistol. Not just a thug, a hitman. James fired first. The gunshot cracked through the cabin, momentarily drowning out the storm. The man ducked, rolling behind the couch. The shot missed, embedding into the wooden wall. James didn't have time to adjust. The second man rushed through the door, gun raised. James whirled, firing again. This time, he didn't miss. The second man staggered back, clutching his side as blood spilled between his fingers. But the first was already moving. James barely had time to react before a fist collided with his ribs, sending him stumbling back into the kitchen counter. Pain exploded in his side, but he didn't let go of the gun. He fired blindly, missing by inches. The assassin lunged, grabbing James' wrist, slamming it against the wall. The gun clattered to the floor. James cursed, his mind screaming. Ethan. He had to make sure Ethan got away. The hitman didn't waste time. He slammed a knee into James' stomach, knocking the wind from his lungs. James gasped, doubling over. The second man, bleeding but still standing, limped forward, lifting his gun. James saw his death in those dark, empty eyes. Then, a gunshot rang out. But it wasn't from them. The second man collapsed, a hole between his eyes. James whipped around. Detective Carter stood in the doorway, his own gun still smoking. His voice was calm, deadly. "Put the knife down, or you're next." James turned. The remaining assassin had drawn a blade, inches from James's throat. For a moment, no one moved. Then, the man lunged. The blade flashed in the dim light as the hitman lunged. James dodged just in time. The knife slashy. Carter fired again, but the assassin was fast. He dropped low, rolling behind the kitchen counter, using it as cover. James grabbed a chair and swung. The wood splintered on impact, knocking the knife loose from the man's grip. But the assassin wasn't done. He lunged again, slamming James against the counter. Hard. James saw stars, his head snapping back. The assassin grabbed a butcher knife from the block, raising it high. A single gunshot rang out. The hitman froze, then collapsed forward, dead. James gasped for air, pushing the body off him. Carter stood at the entrance, gun still raised. "Told you to put the knife down." James exhaled shakily, rubbing his ribs. "Hell of a time to show up, Carter." Carter holstered his weapon. "You're welcome." James's relief was short-lived, because something was missing. His eyes widened. "Where's Ethan?" The woods, Ethan's fight to survive. The storm had swallowed the woods in total darkness. Ethan ran. His breath came in sharp gasps, his sneakers slipping on the muddy forest floor. He had to keep moving. His father had told him to run, to hide. But the second he had reached the trees, he'd realized something was wrong. He wasn't alone. The second man, the one who had been outside the cabin, had followed him, and now he was hunting him. Ethan crouched behind a thick tree trunk, his fingers digging into the bark. He tried to keep his breathing quiet, but his chest ached from running. Then, a voice, low, slow. "I know you're out here, kid." Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. "You can't run forever." A branch snapped somewhere to his left. He was getting closer. Ethan's mind raced. He needed a weapon, something, anything. His fingers brushed against a loose rock. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The footsteps grew louder. "Come on now." The man's voice was almost mocking. "You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." Ethan's grip tightened on the rock. He took a deep breath. Then, he moved. Bursting from his hiding spot, he threw the rock as hard as he could. It hit the man square in the face. The guy cursed at stumbling back, just enough for Ethan to run, but he didn't get far. A hand closed around his wrist, yanking him back. Ethan screamed, kicking wildly. The man grabbed him by the collar, lifting him off the ground. "Enough of this!" Then, another gunshot. The man jerked violently and dropped him. Ethan hit the ground hard, gasping. Through the rain, a figure emerged from the trees. James. His gun was still smoking. His face was pure fury. He stepped forward, standing over the man's motionless body. Then he turned to Ethan, eyes scanning him. "Are you hurt?" Ethan, still shaking, shook his head. I'm okay." James dropped to his knees and pulled his son into a crushing embrace. Ethan let out a shaky breath. It was over. It had to be. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the Charleston skyline in streaks of orange and gold. It should have felt peaceful, but to Ethan, it just felt empty. He sat on the steps of the police station, arms wrapped around his knees. His backpack was beside him, unzipped, the shattered pieces of his snow globe still tucked inside. He hadn't thrown it away, because even broken, it was still his. Behind him, inside the station, Victoria and Travis were being processed. Detective Carter had made sure of that. Victoria Langley, charged with conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. Travis Mercer, charged with attempted murder, assault, and resisting arrest. They weren't going to walk away from this. Ethan knew that, so why didn't he feel safe? The door creaked open behind him. He didn't turn. James sat beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then James let out a slow breath. "It's over." Ethan nodded, but his fingers twisted in his sweatshirt. "Is it?" James was quiet. Ethan turned to him, his voice lower now. She played you, Dad, for months. What if someone else tries again? James ran a hand over his jaw, exhaling sharply. I won't let that happen, he finally said. I won't let anything happen to you again. I promise. Ethan bit the inside of his cheek. Promises didn't mean much when people broke them. But this time, he wanted to believe him. Inside the station, Victoria's final words. Victoria sat in a cold metal chair, wrists cuffed to the table. Her dress, the same white gown she had planned to walk down the aisle in, was now torn, streaked with dirt. Her carefully styled hair was a disheveled mess, strands sticking to her sweat-slicked forehead. Detective Carter leaned against the wall. Across from her, James sat, arms crossed. Victoria tilted her chin up, forcing a smile. Come to say goodbye? James' face was unreadable. Why? Victoria arched an eyebrow. That's a broad question. James's jaw tightened. Why do all of this? You could have walked away. You could have just left. But you wanted me dead. You were willing to kill me for money. Victoria sighed, rolling her shoulders. Oh, James, don't make this about ye. She smirked, the same smirk she had worn on their first date. I'll see you around, darling. James stood. He was done. But before he could walk away, Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper. Mercer wasn't the only one helping me. James's blood ran cold. Victoria's eyes gleamed. This isn't over. James stared at Victoria, his pulse pounding. Mercer wasn't the only one helping me. Her words slithered into his mind, planting a seed of doubt he couldn't shake. Victoria smirked, knowing she had struck a nerve. You really thought this was just the two of us? She whispered, leaning in slightly. Poor James, always so naive. James clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him crack. Instead, he leaned down, voice steady, cold, final. You're going to prison, Victoria. She didn't flinch. And when you're locked away in that cell, forgotten by everyone, I hope you finally understand. You lost. For the first time, her smirk faltered. James turned and walked away, not looking back. As the door slammed shut behind him, Victoria's whisper echoed in his mind. This isn't over. Outside the station, the road ahead. Ethan watched as his father stepped out of the police station. For the first time in weeks, James looked lighter. Not happy, not yet, but lighter, like the weight of everything was finally lifting. He took a deep breath, then sat beside Ethan on the station steps. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then James nudged Ethan's shoulder. You okay? Ethan shrugged. Are you? James huffed a quiet laugh. Not really. Ethan smiled. A small one, but real. Me neither. They sat in comfortable silence, the morning breeze cool against their faces. Then James spoke. We're gonna be okay, you know. Ethan glanced at him. How do you know? James's blue eyes softened. Because we made it through this. Together. Ethan looked down at his backpack, where the shattered remains of his snow globe still sat inside. He ran his fingers over the zipper. Maybe his father was right. Maybe broken things could be rebuilt. Final scene. One last message. As they walked toward the car, James's phone buzzed. He hesitated, then pulled it from his pocket. A new text. No name. Just an unknown number. James's breath caught as he read the words. Unknown. Number. She's right. This isn't over. James's fingers tightened around the phone. He glanced at Ethan, who was already climbing into the passenger seat, oblivious. His son had been through enough. James exhaled, deleting the message. Then he climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled onto the road, heading toward whatever came next. Together.